Hello, everyone, and welcome to a tutorial series where we're going to go through the process from beginning to end in creating a multiplayer, first person only shooter game. And I don't know, guys, there's going to be a lot of videos in this series. Someone is paid me to build these tutorials, so they're going to be uh, private for now, but eventually if I build these things, there may be a point where they do become available to contributors, but I don't plan on these being public on my YouTube page. So, well, guys, I mean, honestly, this first video here is really just going to, set our project up and maybe discuss a few things and get started. So, what we're going to be doing, guys, and I know some of you guys may not be okay with this, but there's a reason why we're going to do this. So we're going to be building this project in engine version 4.15.3. Now, to describe briefly, the reason for this is because as of 4.16, I started noticing a degradation of the multiplayer functionality in the engine. They started upgrading things, changing things, deprecating certain things, and also doing a listen server environment, which is what we're going to be building this for. I also noticed a lot of latency in the engine when it comes to opening up maps, for example, opening up levels, also jitter in the movements of the characters. So unfortunately, we're going to use 4.15, and I know that 4.25 is the most current engine version. But, honestly, guys, we're going to get, I believe, we will get a lot better result if we begin in 4.15, and then at some point, maybe we will upgrade the project to the most current engine version just to see if maybe they've sorted some of those issues that I started noticing out in the newest engine version. Okay, so that's the plan. Also, we're going to do this with strictly free assets, because I don't want, the person that paid for this, he might be willing to buy assets and stuff like that, but I want to try to make this as much of a universal video series as possible. Because once again, it's going to be private on my YouTube page, and he paid for these. So technically he should be the only one that gets these, but anyone in the future who makes contributions to my YouTube page, I believe that it would be worthy of them getting access to this as well, because, I'm going to be putting a lot of work and effort into this. So that's the plan. Okay, so as far as the assets we're going to be sourcing, once again, we're going to keep everything free. Now, that's going to limit the assets that we have available to use. But we will talk a little bit about, during this process, we'll talk a little bit about, how we would go about changing, and we may change some of the assets as we move along through this process. So that's the plan. So to begin with, we're going to create, and once again, he specifically wants this series to go from ground zero, meaning no other assets, no pre-built stuff. We're going to literally batch this out step by step by step with as much discussion and commentary as I can put into it when it comes to making sure that the things that we're doing are understood. Right? I don't want you guys just to click a bunch of buttons like I'm doing. We're going to talk about how we're doing these things. So, as always, these are going to be kind of long-winded, but there's really no getting around that. If you really want to understand what the process is in creating this, it has to be talked about, okay? So, we're going to create a blank project in engine version 4.15. Just to be honest, guys, I'm not really looking forward to this because I've done these so many times, so many different ways. But, we're going to bash it out either way, and I'll try to keep my whining to a minimal. So once again, it's going to be a completely blank project, and we're going to call it MP FPS. Like literally, we're just going to call it multiplayer FPS. That's going to be the name of our project. You guys can feel free to name it whatever you choose to. So we're going to create it. And these first couple of videos will probably be kind of, but it's part of the process of getting things started. I don't want to pre-create a bunch of blueprints, you know, and then have you guys wondering what they're for later on and all that stuff. So the first thing that I think we ought to do is, you know, create our first folder. Now you guys can do your folder structures however you want to. It really doesn't matter unless it's going on the marketplace, right? They have a specific way they want their things done to go on the marketplace. But since this is a personal project, you guys can make your folder structure however you want to. But I'm going to kind of try to conform with the marketplace just because it's out of habit, really. So we're going to make ourselves a new folder. And generally, I just name it whatever the project is. So in this case, it's going to be MP. Oh, it's not going to name it. So if you select your folder and mash the F2 button, that's to rename the shortcut. MP FPS. And then generally, we try to keep all of our folders inside this one folder. That's the way that I do this. So we're going to create a new folder, and this is going to be called Maps. And you guys can see kind of how this tree is going to come together. So the first thing we need to do is create our basically just a little crappy map that we're going to use to start testing some of these things. And it's perfectly okay to start from this map because if we actually go from a completely blank map, we're not going to be able to get our sky sphere back this way, right? This is something that they've done to pretty up the sky a little bit, but we'll talk about all that stuff later. So generally what I do is I just take this platform, select it and delete it. And then I go ahead and delete this player start. Then we come over here. This is all of our different tool sets over here. We're going to go to the landscape tool. And once it comes up this way, we're just quite literally going to create a terrain. And then we click back to the place toolkit. So another thing we're going to do is we're going to add, actually, let's just pull these up here a little bit out of the way. And we will add a skylight. But I want to talk a little bit about the skylight because it's actually an important thing that a lot of people omit. And, you know, once again, this is in no way us trying to create a legit map. This is just going to be our little test map where we spawn in to test out how our character moves around and all that stuff. Okay, so let me just temporarily bring a cube in here. And we're going to hit our resize tool. Select scale objects, and let's make this tool bigger, or I mean this little cube bigger, because this is why I want to do this is because I want to talk a little bit about the skylight. So with this here, let's go ahead and hit build, and this will build the lighting and any navigation and anything that we have in the level, and that will get these black lines out of the terrain. Okay, now the first thing it's going to say here is that there's no importance volume found. So we'll talk about that here in just a moment. So the skylight, guys, the only thing that the skylight affects is the shaded areas. So if you go into the lights section here and you drag in what's called a skylight, as soon as I drag that into the level, I want you guys to watch what happens to the shadow. Do you guys see that? That is literally all that a skylight controls. So when you select the skylight in the level and you come over here This is where you can manipulate like the light color. Now remember, this is only for the shadows. So you can actually change the color of the shaded areas. You can tint just the shaded areas. So we're not going to do that in this case, but I just want to point out to you guys what a skylight is actually for. And you don't necessarily have to have one, but as you can see here, if I delete that, look how dark the shadows become. No, we're not trying to delete the folder. We're trying to delete the skylight blueprint. See there? So if you do not use a skylight, your shaded areas are going to be stupidly dark. That may be something that you want, and then again, it's probably not. So we're going to go ahead and bring that skylight back in here, and we're going to put that just up here in the sky, kind of out of the way of the rest of the stuff. And then we're going to build the lighting again. Now, once again, this is not a map building tutorial, but these are some things that I think that it's kind of important to know even before you begin building your maps. So once again, you can see here that it says no importance volume found. So every map that you guys build has to have a light mass, what's called a light mass importance volume. And once again, guys, I'm not an artist, but I can give you the redneck version of what this thing actually does. So if you go back underneath, if you go underneath volumes here, this is where you can get your light mass importance volume. So what this thing actually does, guys, is when you build the lighting in your level, it fires, let's just call them photons, right? So there's a designated amount of photons that the engine uses to calculate the lighting of an area. So what a light mass importance volume does is it skews the weight of those photons to that specific area. Now that doesn't mean that the photons don't hit other areas. It just simply means that it tries to make the majority of the concentration of those photons focus more on the area that is within the light mass importance volume. So you need one of these, but by having one of these, that doesn't mean that it's only going to do proper lighting in the area of the box. It just simply means it's going to focus more on that area. Because think about it, if you've got stuff way over here that's really just meant to be in the background, it still needs to have lighting on it, but it doesn't have to be as focused as it would be in your playable area. So when you put your light mass importance volume in, this is to define what area of the map that you want to have those photons be focused on the most. So in other words, this would be what you would use to designate your playable area. Also, you can have more than one light mass importance volume. So that means if you want to do one area over here, you can put a light mass importance volume. And if you want to do a different area over here, you can put another one. So you can have as many of them as you want, but you need to have at a minimum at least one. So in this case here, what we're going to do is we're just going to set this to some arbitrary numbers. And generally I go 10,000 by 10,000. And then I'll set the Z would be the up and down. I will set that to something like maybe 1,500. And then after I do that, I basically just grab it, and you see the bottom of the box. I basically just poke that barely down into the ground just a little bit. Okay. And now when we build our lighting, we will not have that error that says, you know, there's no light mass importance volume. Okay, and let's go ahead and do a save all here, and we're going to call this, let's just call it test underscore map underscore 001. And we want to put this inside our maps folder. So let's go ahead and save it in there. And now you can see that there it is. Now this little file that it generates here, basically it's just an arbitrary file that contains your lighting information. So to my knowledge, you can't even edit these things. This is something that it does to optimize the reading of these maps. So this is a proprietary file that contains your lighting information that the engine can access really, really quickly, as opposed to saving them in, oh, I don't know, TGA or Targa files or PNGs. Okay. Now we're going to put one more volume in here called a light mask character indirect detail volume. So we've got two different volumes here. We have a light mask importance volume, and then we have a separate one called light mask character indirect detail. So this one, the redneck version of what this actually does, is this is kind of like the same thing that the light mask importance volume is, but this is one that is specific towards characters, right? So if you don't have one of these in your playable area, the shaded areas, shadow areas of your character is probably going to be like it looked. So you guys remember when we put a skylight in here, how it was able to brighten up the shaded area back behind this? This light mask character indirect detail volume does basically the same thing, but it's specifically for characters, right? So it's a good idea to have one of these, and also you can have more than one, same as with the other one. But this will make it so that your character's shaded areas are not as dark as they are without having one, which I like that, right? I don't like to have really dark shadows. Plus, I like having the ability to alter the color and that kind of stuff. So with this one, this once again would be, you would want this to be in your playable areas. So I'm going to make this one 100 units smaller than the light mask importance volume. So this is going to be 9900, 9900, and 1400. And then same as we did with the other one, I'm just going to take this, get to the bottom of it, and just kind of poke it down into the ground just a little bit. And then we are going to rebuild the lighting yet again. And then we are going to save it. Okay. Now, a couple other things that we're going to do here, just because this annoys me, is we're going to turn off this eye adaptation stuff. So you see how, like, when you go into a shaded area and then you come out of said shaded area, it messes with the lighting. It makes it like super bright. Like if we look at the sun and then look down, you see how it's doing that weird washed out brightening of the areas? That annoys me deeply. So we're going to turn that off. And to do that, we're going to go into the drop down here beside the settings button, and we're going to go into project settings. And inside here in this list over here to the left, we're going to do two things while we're in here. The first thing we're going to do is go under maps and modes, and we're going to tell this to the game default map is going to be this test map that we've created. And then editor startup map, we're going to go ahead and also change that to be the test map. That way, the next time we open the editor, it will open this test map. Now, this default map, that will eventually be the main menu of the game, right? But until we get that created, we have no reason to put it in here. Same as with the game mode and the game instance. We don't have anything to put in here yet, but we will. So we're going to go down to the engine section here, and we're going to go underneath rendering. And under here, there's lots of settings that you guys can mess with. But the ones we're specifically going to focus on are the default settings here. We are going to turn off what is known as auto exposure. That's what's doing that weird eye adaptation stuff. We're also going to go ahead and turn off motion blur. We don't need that at this point. That is optimization things. And we're way, way, way early for worrying about optimization at this point. Okay. And then we shall save that. Okay, now one other thing that we're going to need, at least in the beginning, is a player start. So underneath the basic section here, we're going to go ahead and drag in a player start. And this will be where we start. This is the default starting points, and we will eventually be making, custom ones that are based on the teams and stuff. But for now, we just need a default player start. Let's go ahead and put 2 of these in here, because this is going to be a multiplayer game, and I'm just rotating these to face each other. Okay. And then there's no need to rebuild the lighting when you're only putting in player starts. Rebuilding the lighting is when the geometry in the level changes. And it'll tell you when you need to rebuild the lighting. You'll get the warning here to tell you that. Okay, so now all we're going to do now is hit the play button, and let's just see what happens. So I did spawn in here, and I have a flying pawn is my default pawn that I spawn in with. Okay. And to set this up for multiplayer, this is only for testing, by the way. So to be able to test in the environment that we're actually going to be using in this project, we hit this drop down here beside the play button, and I generally start off in the advanced settings, and underneath the play and new window, I set this to my 720 by 512, and this is just your little play and editor window size. And I also uncheck always center window to screen. Then we hit the drop down again, and we set this to be however many players. Generally, I initially start testing with just 2 players. And then we select new editor window pi. That's each player will get their own window is what this means. And then if you hold down Alt and hit Tab, that gives you the ability to move these screens around. And there we are. And as you can see here, the left screen, if you let me hit Shift and F1, will show you your mouse cursor. If you'll notice up here, this top screen here, this one right here says server, and this one right here says client. So once again, we're going to be building this for a listen server, because that's all I do is listen server stuff. So for future reference, you can always look here to see which one is designated as the server. The server, that means the player that is hosting the listen server. That's what that means. And then, of course, everyone that connects to that listen server will be designated as a client. And as you can see right now, we're just these little flying balls, right? And that's exactly what we are, and that's all we will ever be until we create a character blueprint. Each one of these characters can move around, but something that's strange here, you'll notice that when I move the pawn on the right screen, the client screen, the server does not see this pawn moving. Now, why is this? Well, the reason is because this pawn is what's known as a default spectator pawn, and the movement component in the default spectator pawn is not set up to be replicated. So that means that no matter what we do here, the server is never going to be able to see this client moving around. So that is why we will be creating our own character, because the character movement component in a character blueprint is replicated by default, so we will be able to see each other moving around. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and add a couple assets to this project that we're going to be using. And we'll probably start building the character in the second video, right? I'm going to try to keep these videos about an hour in length, roughly, give or take. But I want to try to divide this up into you know, separate sections so that it's easier to follow. So we are going to open up our launcher here, and we are going to go to the library. And if you do not have this in your library, you should go to the marketplace and get this asset, because it is free, and it is called the Animation Starter Pack. And we're going to go ahead and add that to this project, and this is going to be what we use to prototype out and build our character. Okay, and once you do that, it is now officially added to the project. Now, you guys can leave this the way that it is if you choose to, but in this case, I'm going to go ahead and move this into my MP FPS folder, right? So I'm going to select it, drag it, and drop it over top of that folder, and just hit move here. Okay, and now here's something that I want to talk about. So you see that we told it to move this folder into this folder, and you can see that it did, but it also left this here. Now, why did it do this? The Unreal Engine, just to be clear here, does not like for you to move things. It just don't. I don't know why specifically. I don't know if this is improved with the newer engine versions, but from every time that I've ever used this engine, it hates moving stuff. It literally hates it. So you can see what happened here is that it left some remnants in this folder, right? So you can see in the meshes, it left some stuff in here. Okay, it left the folders specifically. And if we click the Anim Starter Pack folder, you can see that it left a map in here. Now, your general inclination here would be to just delete that stuff. But I would suggest to you guys that this is something that you should get in a habit of early. Anytime that you move things around in the content view folders, what you should do is right click your top folder, which in this case is called content, and do this thing called fix up redirectors in folders. Because what's happened here is by us moving this folder into a new one, it left some things that are called redirectors. Basically, it's a little thing that's behind the scenes that tells the engine that this was here, but now it's here. So it's a little bit of a breadcrumb piece of data that the engine creates when you start moving things around. And you can actually view these things if you want to. So if you come over here to filters and you go underneath miscellaneous here, there is a thing in here called, I know it's in here, right here, Redirector. So if you enable this, it will show you any redirectors that are in the folder that you have highlighted. So as you can see here, when we highlight our main folder, our content folder, this is all the redirectors that it's showing in that folder. Now, once again, remember, these are just little pieces of data that are hidden behind the scenes that when you go to moving things around, the engine says, hey, this used to be here, but now it's here. So it's a way for it to keep track of things. Problem is it don't work worth a crap, just to be honest, because, you know, honestly, moving things, it shouldn't be doing this, especially if none of that stuff is referenced in the level that you're open. Right, but you can see here, as you can see here, it doesn't care. And once again, that will only show you the redirectors for the folder that you have highlighted. So if we was to highlight the MP FPS folder, you can see that there's no redirectors in there. So all the redirectors that it created is because we moved this folder into this folder. Now, when you right click and you say fix up redirectors, watch what happens to these little invisible pieces of data. Now they're gone. Essentially what that does is it permanently makes that different change so that it does not now need that little breadcrumb that gets left called a redirector. So anytime you guys go to moving things around, check your redirectors. Make sure that you don't have any, because see, here's the problem. If we had have just went ahead and deleted that folder without fixing up the redirectors, when we went to try to open one of those animations or whatever that actually had a redirector, it will probably give us an error and not open, right? It actually needs that redirector until you fix them. Then you don't need them anymore. So anytime you move folders around, if it does that deal where you move the folder and it left it, go check that folder. I guarantee there's redirects in that folder. And I'm just going to go ahead and remove redirect. This is just removing the filter. Okay. Now we're not going to be using this showcase map. So let's just go make sure that we don't have anything in this folder here. And we do not. And to double check, I'm going to go in here and make sure that we have all of our animations in here. We do have all of our animations in here. And let's just double check to make sure that we have our mesh. We do, which is fine. We have all of our textures. So at this point, now it is safe for us to go ahead and delete this Anim Starter Pack folder, because we're not going to be using that map. And it looks as though one of the things that got left behind was that map, and we're not going to be using that. So let's go ahead and get rid of it. Just delete it. And in the Anim Starter Pack folder, there's a few things in here that we're not going to be using, right? Remember, the goal of this project here is to go from ground zero. So we're not going to be using these pre-created blend spaces that come in here. We're actually going to make our own from scratch. So we're going to delete the BS crouch walk blend space, and it's going to tell you that it's referencing this Anim blueprint. That's fine, because we're going to be deleting that too. So I'm going to go ahead and say force delete. We're also going to delete this one. Force delete. We are going to be creating our own character blueprint, so we do not need that. We're going to go ahead and force delete that as well. And we're going to be creating our own animation blueprint, so we're going to be deleting that as well. And that should be it. Now, there are a bunch of animations in here. We're likely not going to be implementing all these animations, right? But we're just going to go ahead for now and just leave them in here, because who knows, at some point we might actually start messing with some of these. Okay. So that is all the content that we really need in here for now, with the exception of one more thing I think we should go ahead and get, because we will need it, because remember what this is, right? This is going to be a first-person shooter game. So we're going to get a Crosshair and go ahead and bring it in here. And there's one that I happen to use that comes for free in a default first-person project from Epic. So, you know, and normally I would have all these already added, but the goal here is to go through the whole process of how I build things and share my knowledge with all you guys about how I do these things. So we're going to go ahead and create a new project here. A default first-person template for the sole purpose of just getting the Crosshair out of that project. So we're going to create a default first-person project. I ain't even going to bother naming it. Who cares? We're going to go ahead and create that. And generally, I will just tell you guys, I do not migrate things from one project to another. I would rather export the asset out of the project and bring it into the new project manually. Because as some of you guys may know, that when you migrate assets from one project to another, it brings along a bunch of stuff generally that you don't want, and it also creates different folder structures inside your project, which you probably don't want. So all we really need to do here is dig through here and find, if we open up the first person folder in this textures folder, this is the Crosshair that we're going to be implementing. Simple, we're going to keep it simple, and that's what we're going to use. So instead of migrating, see, you could easily take this, right click, go to asset actions and select migrate. The problem is it's going to create these stupid folders in our clean project that we're starting from scratch, and I don't want to do that. So instead, we're going to select export, and I'm just going to stick that on my desktop, and I'm just going to call it default Crosshair. And generally, you should probably be putting a T underscore prefix on your textures. That's something that Epic wants done on the marketplace, but it would be a good idea to go ahead and prefix any texture with a T. Material, you would prefix with an M, right? And once again, you guys can come up with your own naming conventions or whatever. But once again, I'll try to conform with what Epic likes. So we're just going to save that on the desktop. And then we can get rid of this scrapper project, right? Like, we don't really need this anymore. So let's just go ahead and delete it. And now in our legit project, in our FPS folder, we're going to create a new one, a new folder. And we're just going to call this simply textures. And inside this folder, we're going to import from the desktop that Targa TGA texture file. And as you can see here, it looks a little weird. So we're going to open up this texture here, and we'll talk a little bit briefly about this. But once again, I'm not the art guy. So we'll go ahead and open this up. When you import textures, they generally come in at a default setting. And depending on what it does, you might need to change, whether your compression settings, like for example, there's things in here that are specifically for normal maps, masks. This is the compression that the engine applies to the texture. Okay. So, they also have what's called texture groups, and you can see that there's a bunch of different pre-created groups in here that you can use to group your textures together so that they're easier to find, really, is what this is for. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and set this one to be UI. And then we're just going to save it. And now you can see that it looks like it did in the other project, right? So it's in the group UI. And another thing to note here, just quickly, is that you can see that this has a dimensions of 16 by 16 pixels. And this is just gives you a little bit of an overview of what the settings are, and you can manipulate textures right inside the engine. You can mess with the brightness, the saturation, the RGB curves, and all that stuff. But I generally don't do any of that. But just be aware that if you get a texture on something and it's a little bit too dark, you don't always have to go back to your DCC application to brighten it up a little bit. You can actually adjust that in here to a certain degree. Okay. And I think that is probably going to be where we end this video. Once again, there's going to be a bunch of these. Initially funded are 5 videos, an hour, roughly about an hour each. So that's going to be a wrap for this one. So I think we've already got a good start. We really don't have anything, but the next video, we're going to start creating our character and get our character up, animated, and moving around. Okay. So with that, this is John Galt, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good one, fellows.